Broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Nantan Lupin at the Drive-In.
Welcome to episode 18, The Vikings, 1958. We are currently working on the Janet Leigh line. Go to my website at snarkymoviereviews.com to find all of the Twitter, Facebook, and other social media links. If you like what you hear, you can pop over to iTunes and give me a review. This movie is a nice little period piece, but it's a little strange with its treatment of the women characters. The story is interesting and has enough twists and turns to keep you interested. The on-location shooting is visually striking, and the actors are some of the tops in the business. The role of Ragnar was played by Ernest Borgnine. Borgnine was the child of Italian immigrants. After graduating from high school in Connecticut, Borgnine joined the Navy. He stayed in the service for 10 years, leaving at the end of World War II. His mother suggested that he try acting, and, well, you should always listen to Mama. His first role was a male nurse in the movie Harvey, 1950. He moved to Hollywood and began his career in earnest, pun intended. He hit the big time when he was cast as the sadistic jailer Fatso in From Here to Eternity, 1953. In 1955, he played the lead in Marty. This role garnered him the Oscar for Best Actor. He took the lead on a comedy television show, McHale's Navy, from 1962 to 66. He continued to churn out movies including The Dirty Dozen, 1967, Ice Station Zebra, 1968, The Wild Bunch, 1969, Emperor of the North, 1973, and Escape from New York, 1981. In 1984, he took a leading role in Airwolf with Jan Michael Vincent. Borgnine continued to work, including voiceover roles, until his death in 2012. His last role included the voice of Mermaid Man in SpongeBob SquarePants. Kirk Douglas was cast in the role of Einar, warrior son of Ragnar. Douglas was a descendant of Jewish-Russian parents from what is now Belarus, and he was raised in a tough area of New York City. He went on to be perhaps one of the greatest actors in American history. He performed a little on Broadway until he joined the Navy in 1941. At the end of the war, he returned to acting and was cast in the lead role in The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, 1946. This was followed by a role in I Walk Alone, 1948, marking the first of 7 times he would work alongside Burt Lancaster. In Champion, 1949, he played an untrustworthy boxer. Douglas was cast as painter Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life, 1956. This was followed by the Western Gunfight at OK Corral, 1957, again with Lancaster. In 1957, he played a French colonel in Stanley Kubrick's intense anti-war drama, Paths of Glory. In 1960, Douglas played the lead in Spartacus, a movie that has ties to today's film. Douglas also insisted that blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo be given on-screen credit. This helped break the blacklisting that had rose as a result of Senator Joe McCarthy's Red Scare hysteria in the early 1950s. In Lonely Are the Brave, 1962, Douglas played a rebellious cowboy that didn't fit in the modern world. This was followed by the John Frankenheimer military thriller 7 Days in May, 1964, again with Lancaster. He was cast with John Wayne in the World War II drama In Harm's Way, 1965. In Harm's Way was featured in episode 4 of this podcast. Although Wayne and Douglas differed politically, they were also paired in Cast a Giant's Shadow, 1966, a film about Israel's struggle for independence. And they were cast in the Western The War Wagon, 1967. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Final Countdown, 1980, about a time-traveling aircraft carrier, and also The Man from Snowy River, 1982, where Douglas played a pair of brothers at odds in 19th century Australia. Douglas has long been involved in humanitarian causes, and in 1981 he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He suffered a stroke in the 90s, but remains active. He is the father of actor Michael Douglas and the father-in-law of actress Catherine Zeta-Jones. Tony Curtis was cast as Eric, another son of Ragnar, but through circumstances wound up being a slave. Curtis was the son of Jewish Hungarian immigrants. He grew up in a rough part of New York City as well. He was only close to his younger brother, and this was strengthened by a stint they spent in an orphanage together until their parents reclaimed them. In 1938, Curtis's brother was killed in an accident. Curtis's parents wanted him to get a formal education so he could avoid the poverty that the family had suffered. Curtis, however, wanted an education from the School of Hard Knocks. In 1942, he joined the Navy and remained in service until 1945. He began his acting education on the GI Bill, but was soon noticed by Joyce Selznick, who pointed him out to her uncle. Shortly thereafter, he was given a 7-year contract with Universal Studios. His first role was in Criss-Cross, 1949, where he made Burt Lancaster's character jealous by dancing with Yvonne DiCarlo. Following this, he was cast as a heavy for a time. His roles became larger over time with such vehicles as Sierra, 1950, and Winchester, 1973, also in 1950. He began to get leading roles, including a few that he co-starred with Janet Leigh, whom he later married. These included Houdini, 1953, and The Black Shield of Falworth, 1954. By the late 50s and early 60s, Curtis's career was on fire. His films from this period include Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, where he played an evil hustler opposite Burt Lancaster, The Defiant Ones, 1958, where he played an escaped prisoner chained to Sidney Poitier, Operation Petticoat, 1959, about a pink submarine, Some Like It Hot, 1959, where he was in drag with Marilyn Monroe, Spartacus, 1960, where he was a devoted follower of the escaped leader, and The Great Imposter, 1961. Janet Leigh, Tony Curtis's wife, was cast as Morgana, a Welsh princess. She was discussed in more detail in episode 16 of this podcast, Night of the Lepus, 1972. James Donald was cast in the role of Egbert, an Englishman that was helping the Vikings by making maps of his home. Donald was a Scottish actor that worked on stage and screen in England. He was cast in a few roles with American actors, but in 1956 his role as Vincent van Gogh's brother in Lust for Life got him noticed. He was then cast as a British soldier in The Bridge Over the River Kwai, 1957, The Great Escape, 1963, King Rat, 1965, and Cast a Giant Shadow, 1966, and as the Doctor in the cheesy 5 Million Years to Earth, 1967. His last acting credit was in 1978. Frank Thring was cast in the role of Aela. Thring was born in Australia. He was a fantastic actor and had a career in movies, stage, and television. He was cast as 2 biblical bad guys, Pontius Pilate in Ben-Hur, 1959, and as Herod in King of Kings, 1961. He was also in El Cid, 1961, with Charlton Heston. He played the role of the tax collector in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, 1985. He had bouts of alcoholism and illness during his lifetime. In 1982, he was elected the King of Moomba, a Melbourne festival. The name of the festival may or may not mean up your butthole in many Aboriginal languages. Thring died in 1994. Orson Welles was uncredited as the narrator. I will not attempt to summarize his career at this time because if I did, I would go very long. Story. The movie begins with Orson Welles telling how and why the Vikings were raiding into Europe and how their greatest goal was to die in battle with a sword in their hand. This part of the movie is illustrated in Bayonne tapestry style and is quite nice. This sequence ends with the English prayer, "Protect us, O Lord, from the wrath of the Northmen." Like I said before, this movie has a strange treatment of women, even for the time. Following the intro of Ragnar, Ernest Borgnine, he kills the Northumbrian king and then rapes the queen, Maxine Audley. In a short time, her cousin Aela, Frank Thring, takes over the throne. When the queen gives birth to a son, she sends the baby away to Italy for protection. She ties the pommel stone from the royal sword into a necklace and sends it with the child. The tale jumps 20 years into the future, and Aela is still having trouble with the Vikings. The King of Wales pledges his daughter, Morgana, Vivian Leigh, to King Aela. The king accuses Lord Egbert, James Donald, of treason by being in league with the Vikings. The king wants him killed, but he escapes to his friends, the Vikings, and goes to Norway with Ragnar. When the group returns home, they meet Ragnar's son, Einar, played by Kirk Douglas. Einar is a brave warrior, but is a bit of a man-whore and tends to take instead of ask.
We'll talk about her again when you're more drunk or more sober.
Einar takes an immediate dislike to Egbert, but he is ordered by Ragnar to teach him the Viking ways. Einar tries to show off his hunting bird, but is embarrassed by another hunter's birds.
I think we have hawks to equal that one.
This bird turns out to be the property of the slave named Eric, Tony Curtis, who was captured by the Vikings as an infant. Eric uses his hawk to attack the vain Einar, which results in the loss of Einar's eye. They bring Eric to the great hall for judgment. When Ragnar sees him for the first time, he says,
Look how he glares at me. He wasn't fathered by a black ram in the full of the moon. My name is not Ragnar.
Ragnar asks Egbert what they would do in England, and Egbert foreshadows Ragnar's death. Egbert sees the pommel stone from the English sword and knows Eric is the prince of Northumbria. While Ragnar and Einar are deciding how to kill Eric, an old witch pops up and tells them that whomever kills Eric will be cursed by Odin.
You can't kill the slave.
What do the runes say?
If Odin willed that Eric should die, Thor's hammer would sound his death knell. But the sky is silent. Curse of Odin waits on him who kills the slave.
Then no man shall kill him. Let the tide of the sea do it. Bind him, cast him into the slop pool at low tide. Take him out.
So Ragnar decides to have him tied in a tidal pool where the rising surf will kill him. Egbert, a black slave, and the witch watch over Eric, and a favorable wind saves him from the tide. Eric now belongs to Egbert because Ragnar said that if he lives, anyone can claim him. Egbert comes up with a plan to snatch the Welsh princess Morgana. He plans on leading the expedition and taking Eric with him. Einar is still pissed and glares at Eric with his milky eye. Einar decides to lead the kidnapping expedition. Einar comments to Egbert that maps are no good in the fog. Later, the old witch shows Eric a magnetized amulet that points north.
Love and hate are horns on the same goat.
This makes Eric the only one that can directly navigate the open ocean and sail through fog. Einar captures the princess, and this is where it gets a little more rapey.
Oh, she'd make a fine Viking queen.
Get away from me!
Now first a little kiss of what?
Get away!
Yes.
Remember, she's not to be harmed, or she'd be worthless in trade.
He takes her back to Norway unharmed. When they get back, Einar, Douglas, runs along the oars of the boats. The stuntman had been practicing the stunt for weeks. Douglas did it with no practice. When he fell into the cold fjord water, he swam to the camera boat and asked how it looked before swimming back to the Viking ship. Back to the story. Ragnar gets a little excited when Einar won't give him the princess.
Oh, stop shouting. You sound like a moose giving birth to a hedgehog.
They anchor the boat with the princess in the harbor. Einar tells Ragnar how much he wants Morgana, and Ragnar says take her. He goes to the boat and tries to get her to fight back by biting and scratching, but she won't.
How about my mother? Tell me, did my mother fight you?
Did she fight me? And the scars of her scratches and bites all over me. What a woman. That's how I feel about Morgana. Look at me. You think with this face I want the kind of wife who would let me touch her? I want her to fight me, tooth and nail. First time I take her and the last. You are my son.
About this time, Eric, who is escaping, knocks out Einar, and with the witch and the black slave, they head for England. Einar and Ragnar pursue the escapees into the fog. Ragnar's boat hits a rock, and Eric pulls him from the water. The escapees make it to England. During their travels, Morgana and Eric fall in love. Eric gives her the sword pommel. Eric turns Ragnar over to Ayla and asks for Morgana's hand. Ayla orders Ragnar to be fed to the wolves. Ragnar asks for a sword so he can die like a Viking. Eric gives him the sword and allows Ragnar to die fighting. Morgana pledges to Aela in return for Eric's life. Before he lets him go, Aela chops Eric's hand off. They cast him adrift in his boat. Before the mourning period for Ragnar is over, Eric returns to Norway and asks Einar for help. Eric tells the story of the wolf pit, and the group decides to attack Aela and England. The Vikings arrive with a giant battering ram that they roll down and crush the gate to the outer works of the castle. Aela is at the window making cowardly lion faces. When they get to the inner gate, Eric provides suppressive fire while Einar's group throws axes at the gate. It is not clear what they are up to until Einar runs to the gate and climbs the axes. Once he is at the top, he lowers the gate for the others. Aela is at the window, still making cowardly lion faces.
Yes, sure, sire. The second drawbridge is much stronger than the first.
As the fighting continues, Einar makes straight for the chapel in Morgana, while Eric heads for Aela and revenge. Eric runs down Aela, and during the tussle, Aela falls into the wolf pit. Einar finds Morgana with the priest in the chapel, and delivers a great line when the priest crosses himself.
Take your magic elsewhere, holy man.
At first it seems like Einar is intent on finishing the rape, but instead he tells her he loves her and wants her to be his queen. She doesn't even try to let him down easy. Morgana declares her love for Eric.
You will be my queen. I knew it the first moment I saw you. You knew it too. But that night on my ship.
It's not true.
Yes. It is true.
I don't love you.
You must love me exactly as I love you.
I hate you. It's Eric I love.
Einar sees red. He takes Morgana to the top of the tower, and she tells Einar that he and Eric are brothers and that Ragnar is the father of both men. Einar reacts in a similar vein as Luke Skywalker. Another cut off hand, but that's a different story. Eric climbs the tower, and he and Einar begin a sword fight. Einar breaks Eric's sword and has the high ground. At the decisive moment, Einar pauses because he realizes Eric is the son of Ragnar, as he sees Ragnar's face in the man he is fighting. Eric stabs Einar with his broken sword, but wonders why Einar paused. Eric gives him a sword so he can die with it in his hands, as a Viking should. Einar shouts Odin and dies.
Prepare a funeral for a Viking.
They do a very nice ship burial. So Eric and Morgana live happily ever after as king and queen, having united the Vikings, the Northumbrians, and the Welsh. I have a few notes on this story. Ernest Borgnine, who was 45 days younger than Kirk Douglas, played father to the older man. Douglas was in his 40s and was playing a man that should have been around 20. Following the attack by the Hawk, Douglas was required to wear an opaque contact lens. This was extremely painful, and he could only wear it for short periods of time. Both Douglas and Curtis were big stars at the time. Since Curtis killed Douglas in this movie, they agreed that in the next movie, Spartacus 1960, Douglas would kill Curtis. During the Viking funeral, one flaming arrow was fired early by a stuntman. The director liked the single arrow shot and kept it in the movie. This movie has firm Norse grounding. It was filmed on location in Norway, and many of the people in the movie were locals. The scenes of the Viking boats moving through the fjords was breathtaking. The houses in the village were correctly styled as well. This story is roughly based in history, where two Viking brothers fought with King Aela of Northumbria. In real life, Aela had a snake pit. The semi-historic Ragnar Lodbrok, who this movie appears to be based on, had several famous sons and spent his time raiding England and France. It is believed that he was captured by the historical King Aela and thrown into the snake pit. You can currently see a fictionalized version of Ragnar on the History Channel. This movie also touches on Norse mythology. Odin and Tyr are the gods of war. Odin is said to have only one eye, and Tyr had only one hand. The final fight sequence in this movie appears to be a tribute to the two gods. World famous short summary: family travels to England, things turn out bad. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Remember, you can find all of the links at snarkymoviereviews.com, and I appreciate those reviews in iTunes.